This is a read of Woods Runner by Gary Paulsen, Chapter 10. This time, the sounds of men coughing and axes chopping wood for the fire awakened Samuel. He opened his eyes. The pain was much less, and he saw that it was daybreak. Men were moving all around him. He started to roll, but the head pain stopped him, as well as a sudden memory that he had no pants on. The bedroll was next to him, where Coop had put it. He snaked his pants out, pulled them on, and fastened them with the leather cord around the waist. The pain in his head had abated. It only jabbed if he moved suddenly. The wound felt tight, as if someone were pulling the top of his scalp together. When he unrolled the blanket, his rifle half fell out, and he saw that the lock had dirt jammed around the flint and pan, pushing up the striker plate or frizzen, so that the rifle was not able to fire. The men were making fire, tying bedrolls. One man had what looked to be a permanent bent left arm hanging up at a straight angle. He was sitting on the ground cleaning his rifle. It made Samuel feel embarrassed that his own lock was so dirty. He found his possibles bag in the blanket roll. This was a pouch with the powder horn attached that hung around his neck, where he carried odds and ends of equipment for cleaning and firing his rifle. Inside, he had a tiny piece of steel wire. After blowing the dirt out of the pan and frizzen and flint, he used the wire to clean the touch hole, which fed the jet of flame from the pan into the powder charge. Then he used an oily rag to clean the whole area and put some finely ground black powder into the pan. This was the ignition powder that the flint metal sparks would fire into the powder charge. He closed the frizzen over the pan, eased the hammer to half cock safety, and set the rifle aside. The fire had flared up as the men added wood. Samuel rose to his feet and went into the nearby bushes to relieve himself. His legs were wobbly, but seemed to work well enough, even though he felt weak as a kitten. As one part of his body got better, another would follow. As the pain in his head went down, the hunger in his belly came up. There was the entire back leg from an ox over the fire on a metal spit. Last night, Coop had been cutting bits of it to put in Samuel's broth. Looking at it made Samuel even more ravenous. But the other men weren't eating, so he held back. One thin man with a scraggly beard saw Samuel looking at the meat. He pulled a knife, a really short sword, carved off a generous piece, and handed it to Samuel. You gotta eat. We might walk long today, and it's gonna be hard for you to keep up without your belly is full. Thank you. Samuel took the meat. It was very tough. He sat chewing and swallowing, watching the men clear up camp. While Samuel watched the man and ate, he also rolled and tied up his bedroll, making certain his powder was dry and his possibles bag was ready to go. But these men were even faster. Without speaking except to grunt and point, they seemed to get everything done with the least effort and in the quickest time. The ox was yoked and tied off to a tree. The skid that Samuel had been on, which had two long tongues that went up on either side of the ox and attached to the yoke, was hooked up and packed with extra equipment. The cooking pot, blankets, muskets, and small keg of powder, and another of whiskey, and of all things, a drum left by the fleeting redcoats and Indians. Then the man came and stood by the fire. In silence, they cut pieces of meat and ate. drinking creek water out of a wooden bucket with a wooden dipper. Samuel still had dozens of questions, but since the men were silent as they stood staring into the fire while they chewed, he held his tongue. There were 7 men. When everybody was done eating, they each took a plug of tobacco and poked it in their cheek or lower jaw. They put the leftover meat on the skid and wrapped in a piece of green ox hide to keep the flies off. Then used the bucket to fetch water from the creek to put the fire out. And with no effort at all, they were moving along the trail. 2 men went well ahead, one left, one right off the trail. The rest formed a column. If 5 men could be called a column, then just ahead of the ox and Samuel. In Samuel's weakened condition, there was absolutely no way he could have kept up with the men. But the ox saved him. He knew the ox tended to plod a little less than 2 miles an hour, and the ox was slower yet. Even Samuel had no trouble keeping up with him, and when his legs felt a little weak, he would move to the oxen's side and hold on to the yoke, letting the ox pull him along for a while. Every hour and a half, the 2 men walking ahead would come in and 2 others would move out. On one of these cycles, Coop came back and walked near Samuel. It was what Samuel had been waiting for. You kept me alive. Thank you. It weren't much. A little tobacco and spit and tough meat. I would have been done if you hadn't come along. Maybe, maybe not. No one knows how a wind is going to blow. Why did you all come along? Where are you going? Coop spit. The men all spit. Almost all the time. Samuel had once tried tobacco, first in a clay pipe, then taking a chew, and it had made him sick as a dog. He couldn't see the sense in using it, but all these men seemed to chew all the time and spit like fountains. Maybe something happened to your taster when you got older, he thought, so you didn't mind it. We're going to join up, Coop said, pointing east with his chin, and fight them redcoats. There be a feller named Morgan round about Boston City starting up Morgan's Rifles. We all shoot rifles and we figure to give them redcoats a good taste of shooting. They got nothing but muskets. Good for nothing after 50, 60 yards. Carl, here. He pointed up to where his brother walked beside the head of the oxen. He can pink a man on a horse out to 200-300 yards every time. Wouldn't even know what hit him, nor where it came from. He nodded his chin at the group. Every man here can hit a foot square piece of paper every time at 200 yards. I suppose you could too. Took a mind to it. I'm not sure about killing. You did that Indian back there laying dead and had a bullet hole in him. I wasn't aiming. He shot and I pulled the trigger. What you gonna do when you find your mom and pap? Shake hands with them that took 'em? Samuel felt like spitting too. I haven't thought that far yet. Best be thinking on it and keep your powder dry and your pan primed. Right. Thing is, I didn't even know there was anybody to fight. Who was good or bad, which side to be on. Coop snorted. Don't take much thinking. Them that starts into killing people for no reason, them that comes and takes your folks with rope around their necks, they's the bad ones. Your good people don't do that. What reason? Samuel stumbled on a rock. To his surprise, the ox was aware of it and hesitated to let him catch up. Why did those British redcoats and Indians attack us like that? There was no reason. We weren't against the crown or rebels or anything. Coop spit, nearly taking a fly off the oxen's ear. He snorted, "Redcoats doing it because they's redcoats and ain't worth a tinker damn. Following orders, Indians doing it because they was hired to do it. They's Iroquois, most of them work for the English, always have, always will, ever since the French War. They get all the plunder they can carry and scalp money from the redcoats. Heard there's a man named Hamlin, some kind of redcoat officer. Buys so many scalps, they call him hair buying Hamlin. What I don't understand is why they took your folks instead of killing. Oh, look, the front line is coming in." The column stopped by a Clearwater Creek and everybody drank. Then the men took the meat off the drag, sat in a circle, cutting pieces and chewing. At first, Samuel hung back, but Carl motioned him to squat and eat. Samuel was feeling stronger by the minute, and the meat heated him like fire. No one talked much except for Coop, and when they finished, they rose and took a chew of tobacco and set off. Coop and another man went ahead. Samuel walked in silence, hanging on the wood shaft tied to the oxen. It was mid-morning, and the sun fell through the tall trees on either side of the trail, so they seemed to be walking in a lighted green tunnel. Now and then insects caught sunlight and flashed white small, white like small lamps. Any other time, Sammy would have taken by the beauty of it. But now he could not stop thinking of what Coop had started to say. Why hadn't the raiders killed his parents, and would they do it now? I'm way behind them, he thought. 6, maybe 7 days, dragging along with an ox. God only knows what's happening to them. I have to go faster. The Hessians. The British also used mercenary soldiers issued with the same Brown Bess musket and bayonet. Most of them were troops from Germany called Hessians. While they were relatively effective as combat soldiers, they brought with them such savage, atrocious behavior and committed war crimes so far outside civilized behavior, bayoneting unarmed captive soldiers who had surrendered, farmers, women, including pregnant women, children, even infants, that they became known as little more than beasts and were treated in kind.